The package arrived on a Tuesday morning in late November, and I almost missed it entirely. I had been out back splitting firewood, something I still do myself at 63, though my back reminds me every time that I am not the man I was at 40. When I heard the mail truck rumble down our gravel driveway and pull away, I set the axe down, brushed the wood chips off my flannel jacket, and walked around to the front porch expecting nothing more than bills and maybe a seed catalog my wife had ordered. But there it was. A brown cardboard box about the size of a shoebox sitting on the welcome mat. My name was on it, Harold Mays, 4 Rural Route 9, Delwood, Minnesota. The return address said only D. Mays with a post office box in Portland, Oregon. My son's initial. My son's last name. My son, who had not spoken a single word to me in 2 years and 4 months. I stood on that porch for a long time. The cold November air came off the tree line and I didn't feel it. I just stared at the box the way you stare at something you are afraid to touch, because you know that once you do, whatever you believe right now, whatever small, careful hope you've been keeping alive like a coal in your cupped hands, might turn to ash. My wife, Patricia, opened the front door and found me standing there. "Harold, what are you doing? It's freezing." She looked down at the box and then back at my face. Something shifted in her expression. "Is that from Daniel?" I said it was. She stepped outside without her coat and bent down to look at it. She didn't touch it either, not right away. She read the return address, turned it over, looked at the postage date. Then she straightened up and looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her face in a long time. Not quite hope. Something more careful than hope. "Well," she said, "are you going to bring it inside?" I picked it up. It was lighter than I expected. We set it on the kitchen table and I made coffee while Patricia sat across from the box with her hands wrapped around her mug, watching it as if it might do something on its own. The kitchen was warm. Snow had started to fall outside the window over the sink, the first real snow of the season, small and dry and purposeful. "Open it," Patricia finally said. I got the kitchen scissors and cut the tape along the top seam. I folded back the cardboard flaps. Inside, packed in a nest of brown paper, were 3 things. The first was a photograph. Our family, taken at Christmas about 6 years ago. Daniel was 24 in the photo, laughing at something off camera, his arm around my shoulder. I was laughing too. We looked like people who could not imagine a version of the future where they didn't speak to each other. The second was a folded piece of paper, a handwritten note. Daniel's handwriting, I was certain of that. I had looked at that handwriting on birthday cards and school assignments and grocery lists left on my kitchen counter for decades. I knew it the way you know the sound of your child's voice, even in a crowd. The third was a small carved wooden fox. I had made it myself 20 years ago, the winter Daniel was 7, when he had a bad flu and was home from school for 2 weeks, and I carved it to give him something to hold while he slept. He had kept it on his desk all through high school and college. The last time I had seen it was sitting on a shelf in the first apartment he ever rented. I set the fox down very carefully on the kitchen table. Then I unfolded the note. It said, "Dad, I don't have much time. I need you to know I'm sorry. I've made a terrible mistake and I don't know how to fix it. Please don't reach out directly. She monitors everything. I'll find a way to explain. Just know I'm thinking about you and Mom every single day. Daniel." Patricia read it over my shoulder. She didn't say anything for a very long time. Then she sat down in the chair beside me and she put her hand over mine and we sat there while the snow fell outside and the coffee went cold. My son Daniel was 30 years old. He was a structural engineer, smart, careful, methodical in the way I had always hoped he would be. He had met a woman named Cassandra at a work conference in Seattle about 3 years ago. They dated for 8 months, got engaged, and were married 14 months after they met. I remember thinking at the time that it felt fast. But Daniel seemed happy, and Cassandra was charming in the way that certain people are charming when they are performing for an audience. She was beautiful in a way that required effort and awareness, and she carried herself with a kind of precise control that I mistook, at first, for confidence. The problem started before the wedding, though I did not understand what I was seeing at the time. Small things. Daniel canceling plans with us twice in the same month. Once for a reason that didn't quite hold together when I thought about it later. Cassandra answering his phone when I called, explaining that he was busy, she would have him call me back, and then not having him call back until 2 days later. Daniel seeming distracted at Thanksgiving, checking his phone repeatedly, leaving the table twice to take calls outside in the cold. I asked him once, the two of us alone in the garage, looking at an old truck engine I'd been rebuilding, whether everything was all right. He said yes. He said Cassandra was just particular about schedules, that she liked to know where he was and what he was doing, that it was just how she operated and he was still getting used to it. I didn't push. I told myself it was none of my business. That is something I regret. 6 months after the wedding, Daniel stopped returning my calls. Not immediately, not all at once. It happened the way a tide goes out. So gradually, you don't realize what's happened until you're standing on bare sand, looking at the water in the distance. First a day between callbacks became 3 days. 3 days became a week. Then one Sunday I called, and the voicemail box was full. I texted and got no response. I emailed and got a reply 2 weeks later that was polite and short and felt like it had been written by someone else. I drove to Portland that spring. I didn't tell Daniel I was coming, because I had a feeling, based on nothing I could name precisely, that if I told him, something would happen and the visit wouldn't take place. I drove 14 hours from Delwood, stopped outside of Spokane for the night, and pulled up to Daniel and Cassandra's house on a Wednesday afternoon. Cassandra answered the door. She was perfectly pleasant, the way a wall can be pleasant if it's painted a nice color. She told me Daniel was at work. I said I knew. I had hoped to take him to lunch if he could get away. She said she would let him know I was there, and she went inside and closed the door, and I stood on the porch for 4 minutes before Daniel appeared. He looked thin. That was the first thing I noticed. My son, who had always been built solid in the way of the men on my side of the family, broad through the chest, heavy hands, looked like someone had been slowly subtracting him. His face was tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. We went to lunch, a diner 3 blocks from his house. He sat with his back to the window, and twice while we were talking, he took out his phone, looked at the screen, and put it face down on the table. I asked him how he was. He said fine. I asked about work. He said it was going well. I asked if he was happy. He looked at me for a moment with an expression that I have turned over in my mind many times since. Not the expression of a man who is happy. Not the expression of a man who is miserable either. The expression of a man who has stopped asking himself the question. He said he was adjusting to married life. He said Cassandra was particular, but that she had had a hard childhood, that she needed things done a certain way, that he was learning to work with that. He said they were fine. He walked me back to my truck afterward. He hugged me in the street and held on for a moment longer than he normally would. When he pulled back, he looked at me and started to say something and then stopped. "What is it?" I said. He shook his head. "Nothing. Drive safe, Dad." I drove home 14 hours, wondering what the sentence was that he had started and not finished. After that, contact stopped almost entirely. I got a text on my birthday, 2 lines, warm but brief, a voicemail at Christmas that Patricia and I played back 4 times, listening to our son's voice, trying to read something in the pauses. Nothing else. Patricia wrote to him. Handwritten letters, the kind she still believed in, mailed to their house in Portland. We never knew if he received them. We never heard back. I spent 2 years and 4 months telling myself various versions of the same story. That he was busy. That he and Cassandra needed space. That young marriages required adjustment, and I needed to respect their autonomy. That he would come back to us when he was ready, and that the worst thing I could do was push. And then a box arrived at my porch in late November with a carved wooden fox inside it, and a note that said, "She monitors everything." I read that line many times. She monitors everything. Not "we need space." Not "I'm going through something." Not any of the comfortable explanations I had been using. She monitors everything. That is the language of confinement, not distance. Patricia and I sat at the kitchen table for a long time that first evening. I turned the Fox over in my hands while she reread the note. We talked carefully, the way you talk when the thing you're discussing is fragile, and you're both aware of it. He said don't contact him directly, Patricia said. I know. He said she monitors everything. That means calls, texts, probably email. I know. So what are you going to do? I looked at the Fox. I looked at the photograph of the two of us laughing at Christmas 6 years ago. I looked at my wife's face, which was holding itself very steady, the way she holds herself steady when she is frightened and does not want me to know. I'm going to find out what's happening to my son, I said. My brother-in-law, Patricia's younger brother Ray, is a retired deputy sheriff from Hennepin County. He lives 40 minutes from us, and he's the kind of man who solves problems the way other men solve crossword puzzles, methodically, without drama, slightly irritated if the answer doesn't present itself efficiently. I called him the next morning. He listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. He said she monitors everything, Ray repeated. That's what it says. And contact dropped off right after the wedding. About 6 months after. But looking back, the signs were before. Isolation from family. Monitoring communications. Change in physical appearance when you saw him. Ray paused again. Harold, what you're describing has a name. I had been using the word in my own mind for several days without saying it out loud. Coercive control. I had looked it up on my computer the night after the box arrived, sitting at my desk at 2 a.m. reading articles that felt like someone had written them about my son and simply changed the names. I know, I said. You can't go in blind, Ray said. If she's monitoring his communications, she likely monitors his physical surroundings too. Showing up announced gave her time to prepare when you came to Portland. She answered the door, not Daniel. She controlled the situation. So what do I do? First, you don't do anything alone. Second, you don't do anything that tips her off. Third, he stopped. Do you have any contact with anyone in his life out there? Cokers, friends, anyone outside the marriage? I thought about it. There was a man named Gary, someone Daniel had gone to college with, who was also living in Portland now. They had been close throughout their 20s. I had met him twice and liked him. I had a phone number for him, an old one, from a birthday party Daniel had thrown himself at 30. I didn't know if it was still good. I tried it that afternoon. It rang 5 times, and I was composing myself to leave a voicemail when someone picked up. Yeah? Gary? This is Harold Mays, Daniel's father. A pause. Not the pause of someone who doesn't know who you are. The pause of someone who has been expecting, or perhaps dreading, exactly this call. Mr. Mays, he said. Yeah, hi. I'd been wondering if you'd call. Gary met me at a coffee shop in Portland 11 days later. I drove out again. This time with Ray sitting in the passenger seat, because Ray had insisted on coming, and because I had not objected. We met Gary in a booth in the back. And Gary, who was 31, lean, and carrying the expression of a man who hadn't been sleeping well, set his hands flat on the table and spoke without preamble. I haven't really been able to talk to Daniel in about a year, he said. Before that, contact had been getting more and more restricted. She started coming to everything. Even when I'd text him, she'd respond from his phone sometimes, pretending to be him. I caught it twice because the phrasing was wrong. I felt something cold move through me. He came to see me alone once about 8 months ago, Gary continued. Just showed up at my door, said he was on his way back from the hardware store. He had about 20 minutes. He looked. Gary paused, chose a word carefully. Worn down. He told me things had gotten difficult. He said she controlled the finances, that all their accounts were in her name, and he had a small amount of spending money she approved. He said she had convinced him to leave his engineering firm and take a remote position at a company she had connections to, so she could see his schedule. Patricia, when I called her that night from the hotel, was quiet for a long time. Harold, she finally said, I know. He needs to get out. I know. Can Gary help? That was the question. Gary was willing but uncertain. He was Daniel's friend, not a professional, and the situation had moved past what friendship alone could manage. Ray, in the other bed in the hotel room, was already on his phone. He had connections from his years in law enforcement, and one of those connections was a woman named Carol Hendricks, who worked with a domestic advocacy organization in the Twin Cities that had experience specifically with coercive control situations involving male victims, which, Ray informed me, were more common and more commonly overlooked than most people understood. Carol spoke with me by phone the following morning for 90 minutes. She was direct, unhurried, and precise. She told me that the pattern I was describing was consistent and recognizable. She told me that the most dangerous phase in these situations is typically when the controlled partner begins to reach out for help, because the controlling partner often senses the shift and escalates. She told me that Daniel's box, the coded message, the untraceable return address, the careful choice of a P.O. box, indicated that he was aware of his situation and was looking for a way out, but needed support and safety to take that step. She told me what not to do. Do not contact him in any way Cassandra could intercept or find. Do not show up at the house. Do not attempt to confront Cassandra directly. Do not do anything that would give Cassandra cause to escalate or manufacture a legal situation. She told me what we could do. She connected me with an attorney in Portland who had handled these situations before. She helped me understand that Daniel, as an adult, had to choose to leave, that no one could extract him against his will, and that trying to do so could backfire. What we could do was be ready. Clear a path. Make sure he knew with certainty that we were there the moment he decided to take it. We established a system. Gary was the connection point, because Cassandra had apparently grown less suspicious of Gary after contact dropped off. She may have assumed the friendship was dead and stopped monitoring it as closely. Gary would find a moment to speak to Daniel alone and deliver one message. Your dad knows. He's ready. You say the word. 3 weeks passed. It was December now. Patricia had put up the Christmas decorations at home, the same ones she puts up every year, and I sat under them each evening feeling the distance between those ornaments and my son in Portland like a physical weight. On the 15th of December, Gary sent me a text message with 2 words. He's ready. I drove back to Portland the next day. Ray came with me again. I also brought a folder that the attorney had prepared, information about a temporary accommodation arrangement, documentation of the financial control Carol had helped us understand Daniel could substantiate, and a letter from Carol's organization explaining his options in plain language. Patricia's instinct had been to come too, and she was right, and so she was in the back seat. Gary had arranged for Daniel to come to his apartment on the pretext of helping him move some furniture. A plausible excuse, physical, time-limited, the kind of thing that might not trigger unusual surveillance. When Daniel opened Gary's door and saw the 3 of us standing in that small living room, he stopped in the doorway. He looked at his father, his mother, and his uncle who taught him to fish when he was 9 years old. He stood very still for a moment. Then Patricia made a sound that I cannot describe and crossed the room, and Daniel's face broke open the way faces do when people stop holding them together. We stayed at Gary's apartment for 4 hours. Daniel talked and we listened. He told us about the bank accounts, the job transfer, the way she had slowly, over nearly 3 years, mapped every relationship he had and then methodically reduced his access to each one, not through dramatic scenes but through friction, inconvenience, the steady application of guilt and anxiety until the effort required to maintain each friendship or family connection outweighed his available emotional energy. He talked about the monitoring software she had installed on his phone, which he had discovered 6 months ago and left in place because he didn't know what to do with the knowledge. He talked about the P.O. box he had opened in cash at a location near his office. He talked about the fox. I needed you to know it was really me, he said. I needed you to know I remembered. The attorney had told us that Daniel's situation, while serious, was workable. He had rights, regardless of how fully Cassandra had obscured them from him. He had a career and professional standing that existed independently of her. He had us. The process of untangling a life that someone else has been systematically re-knitting around their own interests is not fast, and it is not clean. I will not pretend otherwise. There were legal proceedings. There were difficult weeks. There was a period when Cassandra, upon realizing Daniel was leaving, made accusations that required the involvement of the attorney and documentation, and days of stress that aged me in ways I can feel in my joints. But Daniel had evidence, quiet, careful. 2-year evidence, stored in the cloud account she didn't know about, on a device she had never touched, accessed from his work computer on lunch breaks. My son, the structural engineer, the methodical one, had been doing what structural engineers do when they identify a problem, documenting it, carefully, waiting until he had enough. He was out by January. Living temporarily with Gary. Working with the attorney. Talking to a counselor Carol's organization had connected him with. A man, which mattered because Daniel had spent 3 years being told that his perceptions of his own experience were unreliable, and he needed someone to help him recalibrate to his own reality. He called me on a Tuesday evening in late January just to talk. No particular reason. The call lasted an hour and 20 minutes. We talked about the truck engine I was still rebuilding, about whether the Vikings had any realistic hopes for next season, about a book he was reading, the same way we used to talk before, the same easy frequency, like finding a station that had only been lost to static for a while. When we hung up, I sat for a while in my chair. Patricia was reading on the couch. The wood stove was going. Outside, the Minnesota winter was doing what Minnesota winters do, indifferent and thorough. I thought about that box sitting on the porch in November, lighter than I had expected. I thought about standing there in the cold, afraid to pick it up. I thought about my son's handwriting on a piece of folded paper. Please don't reach out directly. She monitors everything. I had spent 2 years and 4 months telling myself that respecting my son's autonomy meant staying back. I had confused distance with respect and absence with patience. I understand now that those are not the same things. Staying back is not always respect. Sometimes it is just staying back. What I know now that I did not know then, a person in that kind of situation often cannot shout for help, because the cost of shouting is too high. What they can do is something small. A box, a photograph, a carved wooden fox that means I remember who I was before all of this, and I am still here. You learn to listen for the things that are small and deliberate. You learn to move toward them instead of away. There are parents right now watching this, I know, who have a son or a daughter they haven't heard from in a year, 2 years, longer. You've told yourself the same things I told myself, that they need space, that you'll hear from them when they're ready. I'm not saying every silence is what mine was, but I am saying if something feels wrong, it is worth more than waiting. The fox sits on my mantle now. Daniel saw it there when he came home for Christmas this year, the first Christmas in 3 years, and he stopped and looked at it for a moment without saying anything. Then he picked it up and turned it over in his hands, the same way I had turned it over in mine on that November morning, and he set it back down carefully, and he went to find his mother in the kitchen. I let him go. Some moments belong to other people. The job is just to make sure those moments are still possible.